Hey guys, and welcome back to the Warwick F1 show. This is the 25th episode of the 2025 season, and in this episode today we are going to be discussing the events of the Austrian Grand Prix that happened over the course of the last weekend. Now, the European circuit of the F1 calendar is well and truly begun as we went to Spielberg, which saw a Lando Norris masterclass as he won ahead of his teammate Oscar Piastri and championship leader Oscar Piastri in a battle that lasted throughout the Grand Prix. He had to withstand an early storm and a late surge from Oscar Piastri in order to earn a victory at the Austrian circuit. They were joined on the podium by Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, who was just ahead of his teammate in the positions as Lewis Hamilton finished fourth. I'm your host for this one, Anwar, and I am joined once again by Daniel and Callum. So thank you guys for coming on. Firstly, just wanted to ask, what was our assessment of the race as a whole? Was this an entertaining one? Where does this stack up compared to everything else we've seen so far this season? I'll start with Daniel.
Yeah, hugely entertaining in my opinion. Probably in the top three of the races we've had so far, I'd say. The prolonged McLaren battle was obviously the main reason for that. It was just epic, back and forth, such a great attack and great defence, respectively, from Norris and Piastri. We got some more strategy variation yet again. I think the last clear-cut one-stop strategy that we had was, I think it was Miami, which is round 6, and that was around 11 that we've just had. So we've had a lot of two-stop races, which is great for the racing. As we saw, there were a couple of questionable actions on track, as I'm sure we'll get into, from Antonelli, Colapinto maybe. So lots to talk about today.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I'd maybe put it in maybe an 8 or even 9 out of 10. It's got to be one of the best races of the season so far. I think probably one of the first, or maybe the only kind of prolonged on-track battle for the lead we've had all season, I imagine. This wasn't just a battle that just lasted a couple of corners. This battle at the very start of the race lasted for, it's got to be, 5, 10, 15 laps, I think. I can't remember exactly, but it went on really until Norris pitted for new tyres. So it was certainly a very prolonged battle, and big credit to both McLaren drivers for keeping it clean, but also Piastri for constantly applying the pressure. And then obviously, as Daniel said, some really good strategy calls, and also some really good battle throughout the midfield as well. We had that really great battle between Alonso and Bortoleto near the end for I think 7th. So it was a really entertaining race, and definitely one of the best races of the season already, for sure.
100% agree with the both of you. I think this is the first time we had a really, like you said, a prolonged battle between the two championship protagonists. Right, they were going blow for blow throughout the entire race, essentially. And also, we kind of have this reputation of Austria being a pretty good racing circuit, and it's tended to underperform over the last couple of years, but we absolutely saw entertainment throughout the field. Like you said, you mentioned the Bortoleto battles, the Haas's were getting involved with some overtakes as well further down. Colapinto was in the wars, so lots of entertainment across the field. So I guess every fan that wasn't a Red Bull fan or a Williams fan came out of that pretty happy, I guess. Before we get into all the details and all the action, I'll ask Daniel to give us our race rundown.
Brilliant. Okay, so this is how the Austrian Grand Prix went. Lando Norris took a win in Austria. The championship battle clearly not over yet, mostly because the battles have only just started for the McLaren drivers, because Piastri finished P2 with a controlled onslaught, I'd say, onto Lando Norris. I think lap 11 might go down in history as a great Formula 1 lap, at least it will in my head. Charles Leclerc finished P3 after doing more coasting into corners than the country of Canada, which has the longest coastline in the world. Lewis Hamilton had his joint best finish of the season in P4, despite having many, many difficulties, brakes, understeer, oversteer. A clean weekend for Lewis is rarer than red flags this year in races, which is to say none. And you wouldn't really know it wasn't Russell out on the first lap, because we didn't really see him much after the start. He ended up in 5th place. In 6th place, it was finally Lawson's turn to be the furthest forward of the kind of capricious Red Bull situation. Maybe he's finally over his toxic ex, which is, of course, the RB21. And Alonso proved his status as the manager this weekend to end up P7, manager of poor cars, bad luck, and pesky rookie behind him, who also happens to be his client. Speaking of Bortoleto, he finished 8th. Bom dia, welcome to the points. I'm sure the Audi overlords will be very pleased with that performance. In 9th place was Nico Hulkenberg, double points for Sauber. He qualified P20, but then remembered that good things come in 3, so decided to get a 3rd points finish in a row. Maybe he really is the GOAT of Austria, if you ignore the qualifying, of course. Esteban Ocon in P10, he had no drink or race, but dehydration and a few sausage curbs never stopped a determined Frenchman to score from P17 on the grid. Ollie Behrman, he used all 3 tyre compounds in the race, but he kind of struggled in the middle stint and lost out to everyone else there. Hadjar went off track to avoid the Verstappen-Antonelli incident. He ended up 12, but he had some floor damage that cost him over a second a lap as well. In 13th, Gasly just got mugged the whole race. He had a lot of damage too. Lance Stroll in 14th. He was one of the victims of Tsunoda's ambition, shall we say. And in 15th, Colapinto was another, but I think his awareness rating on the F1 game probably went into the negative numbers after moving over on Piastri when he was clearly being shown blue flags. In 16th, we come to Tsunoda himself, eerily similar to the overtaking ethics we saw from Perez when he was struggling in that seat. And then we move into the DNFs, sadly, for Alex Albon, who might have signed a deal with the devil instead of a contract extension at Williams. I mean, 3 DNFs in a row is just abysmal for him. Max Verstappen was out of the race on lap 1. He qualified in the carbon fiber zone, which very much turned out to be fitting of its name. The other DNF, is it a torpedo? No, it's just Antonelli after he heard the rumours that Max would replace him at Mercedes instead of Russell and just decided to punt him out the race. Okay, and a DNS, this one, was Carlos Sainz, who was on fire this weekend, I guess you could say, which was a great callback to the famous incident from Austria 3 years ago when his car went up in flames when he was looking good for a second place finish. His brakes got a little too hot for him there, and that was what happened in Austria.
Awesome. That was a very entertaining race rundown. I found myself laughing quite a few times on that. I think there's an obvious place we should start, and it's with the championship battle and the 2 people who finished 1 and 2 over the course of Austria. I want to firstly look back at what we were discussing in the preview for this Grand Prix in terms of what we were thinking Norris needed to do at some point either this weekend or in the next few. And that was having a mistake-free Q3, converting his pole and sauntering to a win. Now, he achieved 2 of those 3 things, but it's the lack of that third thing that was the most impressive to me, because he didn't have it all under control in the sense that he was under pressure the entire time. Yet he was able to withstand that pressure and was able to take home a really thoroughly deserved victory. How impressed were we, and how much does this win matter in terms of the longer-term championship battle, in terms of our hopes towards it, Callum? Do we think that this was a result that kind of makes us hope and gets us excited?
Well, it's certainly gave us an indication, I think, that the championship battle is still very much on. I think that's something that Lando Norris wanted to make clear going into this weekend, or as soon a weekend as he could, and he certainly established that in this race. And also as well, going into Silverstone, as we mentioned in the preview, it was absolutely paramount that he really started to turn this around if he actually wanted to challenge Piastri for the title, and what a performance he put in. I think, and as we mentioned, it's not like he was gifted the race in any way, a bit like how Russell was last year after the collision between Verstappen and Norris, or it's not like he maybe Piastri crashed out, or I suppose Verstappen did crash out at the start, who might have been a contender coming up through the field, but then he did qualify in P7, so maybe it's a bit naive to assume he might have been able to contend with the McLaren pace. But Piastri, I think I was just as impressed really with Piastri in this race, with, even though he qualified in P2, just how much pressure he was able to put on Lando Norris for the race win, for the battle for the lead, essentially. We've seen it many times, especially in this season, where if the driver on pole position can get away through turn 1, they can easily build up a 1 or 2 second gap due to them being in clean air and the second place driver, of course, being in the dirty air. But that really didn't happen for Piastri. He was on the back of Lando Norris consistently throughout those multiple laps before Lando Norris eventually came into the pit stop. So great work from Piastri to give us an amazing battle, but also Lando Norris with an incredible performance, and one thoroughly deserved, because he really had to fight for it, and he really showed that he can be as consistent on his day as Piastri, because it was actually in the case this weekend that I think Piastri probably made a few more mistakes than Lando Norris, which is not what we've come to expect from the first half of the season. So yeah, brilliant performance from both of the McLarens, but especially for Lando Norris for being able to withstand that pressure throughout really the entire race and bring home the win that he most desperately needed.
Yeah, Christian Horner, you're not the only one who was impressed at Piastri's ability to keep pressure on Norris throughout, particularly that first stint. Christian Horner said something along the lines of he was very surprised that Piastri was able to, I'm quoting him here, make love to the exhaust of the other McLaren. Daniel, this has been a track that McLaren and particularly Norris has performed really well at over the course of recent history. Yet we still had doubts on whether he would be able to, Norris here in this case, would be able to replicate it under the backdrop of a title challenge and stuff like that. Do we think that he has calmed that type of discussion with a performance like this?
Well, yeah, we did mention that in the preview, didn't we? We said that, Norris, this is a strong track for him, but what he struggled with this year, could potentially mean that he misses out on a good result. But we said he needed a good Q3 firstly, and he needed to be ahead of Piastri at the end of lap 1. He did those things, and look at what happened. He was able to control the race. He had Piastri mostly under control. There were a couple of moments where it was a bit hairy, but other than that, he did a good job. So for Norris, that discussion that we've been having about him having his difficulties, it's not fully cured yet, obviously, because the big problem for Lando Norris has been his consistency this year. And, that was not exactly a one-off, but it was his first proper great performance since Monaco, you'd have to say. So I am very curious as to how he will carry that performance forward. But yeah, I'm surprised Piastri wasn't able to get past him, to be honest. A couple of times he looked very close going into turn 1 with the DRS on the next straight even, but Lando Norris was very clever with his energy deployment as well. There were some games that were being played there, which meant that Piastri couldn't quite get enough of an overlap to get past, and his tyres were somewhat overheating behind Norris, but not as much as you'd expect, which I guess secures McLaren's position comfortably as the best car on their tyres.
Yeah, I don't think there was any doubt in terms of who has the best tyre wear and tyre management. You mentioned something there that kind of caught my eye, which was the whole games being played. And we have also on this podcast been very critical of his racecraft. He's been, I'm thinking Miami, where he was held up by Verstappen for way too long to try and put pressure on Oscar Piastri, who was in the lead at that time. This was the first real example this season where I look at and think Norris has just outplayed and outcrafted his teammate. Piastri had the benefit of DRS and the slipstream, and there's 3 DRS zones on this track as well. So it's a massive advantage if you are able to sustain that pace and stay behind in that kind of slipstream. Yet he still wasn't able to get past and complete the move. Callum, do you think this shows a bit of development on Norris's side? Because we haven't really seen him play these games and win. It's then something that he's generally struggled with. Yet we saw this weekend that wasn't the case. He seemed like he had this under control in terms of knowing where to kind of overtake and use his deployment efficiently.
Yeah, it was obviously a really incredible defense set up by Norris. He was making that car as wide as anything, as wide as a bus, going into some of those corners. And the defense he did show against Piastri, who did have the DRS and was certainly putting lots of pressure going into turn 4 quite a few times, especially in the opening battle that we saw between them two. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's an improvement in his racecraft as such, because I feel like we've seen this from him before in previous seasons when the McLaren car wasn't as dominant, and so we would often would find quite a bit more the McLarens fighting within the field, and we did see those signs of it from Norris. I just think it's the first sign that we've seen that from him really this season. I think it's maybe just a case of him coming to a track that he's very much comfortable with. He's got good memories of as well, and some good performances in the past that he feels very confident at. I felt like it just took maybe that, because of the bad form that he's been on for the start of this season. I felt like it just took a circuit that he's more comfortable with, and a good run of a good run in maybe the practice sessions, and obviously pole position as well, for us to actually see that within him this season. Because you're absolutely right, we haven't seen that enough from him this season, and that's exactly why Piastri is sitting at the front of the championship, because he's been the more dominant one. But then I do firmly believe that for this season, it's been a case of we haven't seen that racecraft from Norris, not that it hasn't been there, if that makes sense, because he's shown it before, but he just hasn't expressed it as much as he probably would have liked in some of the races in the past.
Yeah, I agree. And just one thing I'd say is I think what really helped Norris kind of on the defensive front and battling Piastri was his battle with Max Verstappen last year. Obviously not how it ended, but kind of going back and analysing that, which he said he did. He went quite into depth on kind of what could have been done better from his front, what was Verstappen up to, what, how Piastri could apply the pressure and where he could do it. And I think it really did pay off at one point when Piastri did get through on Norris into turn 3. He had the inside, but Norris very calmly moved to the outside and opened up the corner more, got that DRS and took it back from him. He had an awareness of where the DRS line was, detection point was, to help that happen, and he executed it. So I think the experience that he has really did come to the fore in that position. Piastri last year, he wasn't as busy in the race, so maybe that's kind of where he fell a bit short compared to Norris.
And I think the point that you've just mentioned about Piastri not being in the wars as such in the same way Norris was is something that a lot of people are kind of ignoring, because they look at Piastri and see his calm demeanour and how he deals with pressure and kind of thinks, okay, he's got this in the bag. But this still was only his 3rd season in the sport, and he's naturally not going to have experienced as many of the battles or any of the side-by-side nature of things compared to Norris in a Formula One car. So there is inherently going to be that type of difference in terms of the way they approach different battles and stuff. So that's going to be interesting to see how well Norris kind of utilizes his kind of toolkit, as it were, which Piastri hasn't fully fleshed out in the same way. I think another thing to mention about this kind of weekend is the fact that the two McLarens both were pretty comfortable. They had no threat from behind. Do we think that this type of battle that we saw is only going to really be present if they have no competition? They didn't have a Verstappen breathing down their neck. The Ferraris were much slower, and the Mercedes were in no man's land. Do we think that also had an impact in terms of the type of battle that we saw this weekend, Callum?
Yes, in a way. I think obviously the battle might have evolved a bit differently if they had some competition, because there was less of a mindset of the McLarens having to work together against maybe a Verstappen as such. They didn't have to really have any concern for that this weekend, obviously with the DNF of Verstappen very early on, and the fact that the Ferraris and the Mercedes weren't really anywhere. So it is possible that they would have done that. I mean, I think realistically, I don't think the Ferraris are anywhere yet even approaching challenging the McLarens. They did have a big leap forward this weekend with some of the upgrades that they brought, and we saw that with them being definitively the second best team to finish the Austrian Grand Prix, finishing 3rd and 4th. I think that maybe Mercedes might be able to challenge them a bit more in Silverstone with the cooler conditions that it's looking like for the race weekend. And then obviously Verstappen, I think that just purely depends on how good the Red Bull car is, because we know that whatever happens, he will extract the most out of it. But I think certainly the fact that we had sole attention on those two drivers really did define the dynamics of the race, and also the battle that we saw out front. but because they were extending like a 5 or 6 second gap, an incredible gap to the cars behind. For sure. So it might be different in Silverstone when we have Verstappen racing for a few more laps, when we have maybe the Mercedes coming into a better operating window, I suppose you could say, with their car, with the cooler conditions. There might be a much different battle that we're seeing, one that's maybe more heavily emphasized on strategy rather than on-track action, when we have the introduction of those other teams in competition with the McLarens.
Yeah, I think it might be. Daniel, would you say would you agree with Callum in the sense that this battle probably looks different if we had another team or another driver just nipping at the heels?
Yes, I would agree. But to be honest, I really didn't mind that George Russell, the last race winner, finished over a second behind the McLarens because that battle was going on. Obviously, if one driver was dominating, it would have been very different. We would have been saying, oh, what does Formula One come to? This was supposed to be the closest season in F1 history and things like that. But like I said, I didn't mind. I think the dynamics would have been different. Obviously, in Canada, there were the situation was kind of changed by the fact that they were surrounded by drivers. So, maybe if they lost a fair few seconds here and there battling together throughout the lap, that could have cost them and also hindered their position to catch up to Antonelli and things like that. But in the end, they didn't need to. I'm glad McLaren built such a great car that works well in hot conditions because it allowed us to have that brilliant battle. Next weekend, Oscar Piastri could dominate the race and I'd be saying, I wish there were other teams in the battle. But right now, recency bias is ruling me, and I'm fine with it.
Recency bias is a fan's worst nightmare, I guess. It's something that we always lean upon. Just the last thing before we move away from the McLaren discussion, because we've talked about them for a bit, is I just want to focus on the team itself and the way they treat this battle, because after the incident in Canada between the two McLarens, which led to Norris's retirement, there are a few discussions about whether we would see a more controlled environment between the two. And what we saw was a lot of fighting in the first stint. They did give that warning to Piastri just to say that the move that nearly took the two of them out was a bit marginal, and essentially told him not to try that type of maneuver again. Were we happy in regards to how McLaren dealt with the two fighting McLarens?
I do think so, and I do give them a lot of credit actually for allowing them to have that sort of battle, knowing what we've just come out of in Canada, where obviously it led to the DNF of one of their drivers and a whole loss of points for the Constructors' Championship. If I'm honest, now thinking about it, they probably can afford to because they know that their car is the most dominant on track and they have a very nice gap in the Constructors. I mean, the only real type of, proper challenge they've had apart from last race in Canada has been from Verstappen this season. And obviously he's just one driver against two. So they probably can do that as a result. But to be honest, I think there's not really other option that they could do, because the only other option they would have is to prioritize one of their drivers. But then you come to the problem of who do you pick? I mean, Norris has clearly been dominant all weekend, but then Piastri has clearly been dominant all season. So it would be, I think if you want to let them race, it would come to a very difficult decision of what to do. And you were undoubtedly going to upset one of the drivers because they would equally feel like they have a right to be prioritized in that race for the reasons that I just mentioned. So, yeah, I think it was very much the right decision from McLaren, and it paid off because we got a good battle, a good clean battle, and a 1-2 for the team ultimately.
Danny, were you in the same way, Callum, pleased that they were allowed to let them fight as well in the way that we did?
100%. Yeah, I'd go so far as to thanking McLaren for letting them race. Obviously, it's a bit of a headache for the team, of course. Heart rates would have been a bit elevated, but think about previous dominant teams in Formula One. You've had Red Bull prioritizing Verstappen, absolutely. You had Mercedes prioritizing Hamilton. Vettel was less prioritized at Red Bull, you'd have to say, but it was still, he made himself dominant, really, but especially with multi-21 and everything. Obviously, Schumacher at Ferrari. So I'm just glad that we're getting a team that's dominant at some tracks, but also two teammates within that team who seem to be, for the most part, evenly matched in terms of pace, and especially in Austria, which the result was great. And it's the recipe for fights for the lead, basically, which is the most exciting thing about a Formula One race.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that sentiment. Let's move on from the McLaren discussion and talk about the incident at turn 1 between Verstappen and Antonelli, because that, I felt, probably reduced the amount of threat in behind the McLaren, even though they probably were very likely to saunter away from it. We did reduce the amount of competitors, I guess, in that at the sharper end of the field. So what was our assessment on the incident between Antonelli and Verstappen? For the viewers at home, this is where it's turn, I'd like to say 3, which is the one that is at the top of the hill. Antonelli on lap 1 misjudged his braking point, went straight into the back of Verstappen, taking the two of them out. What was our assessment on where the fault lies, Callum?
I don't think there's much real assessment that needs to be made. I mean, I think ultimately Antonelli accepted responsibility pretty quickly. You can hear that in the post-race interviews, and also the fact that he went over to apologise to Verstappen straight after the incident when they both got out of the cars. And I think he's absolutely right. It's clearly nothing to do with Verstappen. He was actually, if you look at his onboard footage, he was being incredibly cautious. And I think apart from what happened with Antonelli, I think he did a really good job of showing his maturity and avoiding action and trying to keep that position and keep his car free from any damage in those opening stages. Something that he's probably not quite used to nowadays. Obviously, he's used to being at the front normally, especially for the last couple of seasons. But yeah, it was clearly a fault from Antonelli. Just misjudged his braking point going up the hill. We should bear in mind, I don't think this is a track that he's raced at before, or certainly not in F1. So yeah, he still has some stuff to learn. He's still going to make a couple of mistakes like that, and it's going to be this was one of the cases for that. So yeah, totally Antonelli's fault, and he accepts blame for that. He might get a grid drop for Silverstone. I think, I'm not sure if they've actually decided that yet.
I think it's confirmed. He's got a 3 place, right?
Okay, he's confirmed that he got a grid drop, which makes sense because
yes,
like I said,
right.
He was at fault for the incident, but he didn't get penalised in any way after that because obviously he was out of the race. So yeah, that was my assessment of it, and I think many people would agree with me.
I am one of those many people who agree with you, Callum. Just to put some more meat on the bones, he locked the rears. He said to the stewards that he braked at his normal braking point, but then he did come off the brakes to avoid Lawson, because obviously braking and turning wouldn't have worked because he would have locked the fronts as well as the rears. So he came off the brakes to avoid Lawson, but then, of course, he was on the dirty inside. Then he just obviously careered into the side of Max Verstappen. Christian Horner said after the race that Max would have been challenging the Ferraris, which I completely believe if that incident hadn't happened. But yeah, it is pretty clear cut that it was just a mistake from Antonelli. He owned up to it. Rookie error, probably. Should he have been a bit more cautious? Probably as well. So, it's not career ending. It's not going to haunt him like his Monza FP1 crash did for a few months afterwards. I think it's just a case of every rookie's done it. This is his second big mistake of the year. It's the biggest he's made, but obviously there was like crash in Monaco as well, which put him out in Q2, which was a shame. But this had consequences for someone other than his own weekend. So, it's in the spotlight quite a lot because he's taken up the world champion, obviously. But yeah, he'll be back. It's one of those things that he can just brush off and get going in Silverstone, where he's gone well in the past in junior Formula.
He's shown his highs. There's obviously going to be lows as a rookie in Formula One in a pretty quick car. So I think we should all look past it. It's a rookie mistake. We move on. Really, I don't think there's much else to be discussed about that. Let's talk about the Ferraris quickly, because this was a race weekend where they brought an upgrade to the floor. And what we saw out of it was a 3rd and a 4th place from their two drivers, with Leclerc finishing on the podium and Hamilton honestly racing a pretty lonely race in 4th. Is this the type of improvement that we want to see from Ferrari, or in truth, do you feel? Do we all think that this is kind of them? This is all it's going to be for Ferrari this season.
I mean, I think this is as high as they can get realistically. I think the McLarens are just too far ahead at this stage. I think, to be honest, as we already mentioned, Christian Horner did say that Verstappen was going to be up challenging the Ferrari. So I think Ferrari did luck out a little bit in a way that Verstappen was taken out early on in the race, because it meant that ultimately what was potentially going to be a fourth and fifth place finish for them, if Verstappen was able to get onto the podium places, was then made into a podium and a fourth place finish. So a whole lot more points for them. So I think that obviously it does represent some really good improvement from them, which we were kind of hoping in the preview from their upgrades. Again, a bit doubtful to how it compares to Silverstone, because I do think the Mercedes are going to be stronger in Silverstone with the cooler conditions. I think the car was really struggling for Russell this weekend, because it was absolutely sweltering in Austria throughout the entire weekend. And so I do think that maybe the Mercedes will be able to challenge them quite a bit. So it's maybe going to be dependent on the circuit with how they're able to keep that position. But it's certainly a step forward for the Ferraris. Out of what was a pretty dire start to their season, with so much hope going into it, with Hamilton coming in, hoping to challenge the McLarens and ending up where they are. But they do seem to be on an upward trajectory, which will be good for the Tifosi to see.
Yeah, same type of question to you, Daniel. Is this something that you look at and think, okay, this is a substantial step forward for Ferrari, or is this like a menial type of improvement that will eventually kind of balance itself out?
I mean, it is really hard to tell, because Verstappen obviously wasn't in the race really. Mercedes had woeful tyre overheating because of the temperature, so their direct competition, or what has been their direct competition for the past few races, weren't really at the fights. They couldn't demonstrate where Ferrari were relatively. So maybe if they hadn't even brought those upgrades, they would have finished third and fourth anyway because of that. But, they did bring quite a lot. They brought new floor fences, floor body, floor edge, and a bit of a diffuser upgrade as well. But I don't think that's everything. I think they're bringing something else. Charles Leclerc was asked over the weekend whether that's going to be Silverstone, and he said he wasn't sure. So maybe they'll have even more upgrades for this coming weekend, or perhaps not. We'll have to wait and see. But overall, I think we've said it before, Ferrari have different issues as well, including reliability. I mean, Lewis Hamilton, he had a really rough race because he had massive understeer in the low-speed corners, but massive oversteer in the high-speed corners, and he had to manage a brake issue the whole race as well. So, they can focus all they like on making the car faster, but at the same time, when that car's fast, they need to be able to maximize it with a good setup, which obviously wasn't really what happened in Austria. But, they can just build on that. I guess Charles Leclerc said they're working in the right direction. I believe him. So I guess we'll wait and see what happens over the coming weeks and how that upgrade fares at different tracks, because they did say in their notes that the upgrade wasn't event specific. So, we could reap the benefits at a few more weekends in the future.
Yeah, and most probably seems like it's a more forward-looking upgrade that will have benefits in other races as well as the one that we've just seen. It's never straightforward with Ferrari. It's never, okay, there's progress, but they've had a few issues, right? I think it's just the type of frustration that we've kind of shown on this podcast towards Ferrari is exactly the same frustration that we kind of have with them now. It's like, do we know for certain that this is going to be something that they can push forward and continue in terms of momentum, or is this just going to be a step back in a few races' time? We'll have to wait and see if that does happen. I think the next kind of points that I want to kind of discuss, and I'm saying points as a group, because there's a group of midfield drivers who filled out the rest of the points paying positions. We saw I was going to say an AlphaTauri. They're not an AlphaTauri. It's a V-carb. The V-carb of Liam Lawson finished in sixth position. Sixth position. I nearly got that wrong. And then he was followed by an Aston Martin, 2 kick Saubers and a Haas in the points. So firstly, who out of that kind of gaggle of cars in the lower points impressed you most this weekend, Callum?
I think for me, it's got to be, I'd say Bortoleto. I'm still so impressed that the Saubers are doing as well as they are, to be honest. I think we all thought at the start of the season that they were just going to be plumb dead last, as they were, but they've really impressed us. Certainly Hulkenberg. I'm only not saying Hulkenberg because we've kind of seen that from him in other races. Previously this season, we know he's been doing exceptionally well in that car, but obviously I think this was the first points finish for Bortoleto this season. And not only that, he showed some really good signs of fighting with Alonso. I think he was quite unlucky to not get that position in the end. It was a shame that he didn't get that position in the end, because if he did overtake Alonso at the end, then that would put Sauber up to 8th in the championship above Aston Martin, which is just mental to think about. But he really showed some good signs of the car control, being able to overtake as well. And yeah, he really impressed me. Although I should say that I was also really impressed with Liam Lawson. That performance just came from absolutely nowhere. The fact that he's been able to get those points for the team is really great. And also I'm glad for him at least as well that he seems to have bounced back from and really regained some confidence in F1 since obviously his really poor stint at Red Bull, because I think you could just tell from his demeanour and his interviews and things like that stint really took out of him for probably, for the most part, not even reasons of himself, because we know, obviously it's a discussion for another day, but we are pretty certain now that Red Bull car, the problem's not with the drivers, it's the fact that they set the car up for Verstappen, or just the way that they set it up in general. So, and he lost a lot of confidence from that. So I'm very happy for him as well, that he was able to get that performance. So yeah, certainly Lawson and Bortoleto, I was, out of those four, five drivers, I was really impressed with.
Yeah, Bortoleto had a great weekend, didn't he? He was just really fast, and he was so happy after the race that he'd finally got those points on the board. It looked like a relief. At one point, I think he was P6, and I couldn't really see anyone behind who looked like getting it off of him and taking that position away from him. In the end, I think it was Sauber's strategy team that kind of took it away from him a little bit. He lost some time track behind his teammate when they were on slightly different strategies. So that was the only hiccup. But other than that, it was great. Sauber brought yet more upgrades this weekend to the floor body and a new rear wing, which that rear wing, by the way, is specifically designed for more high downforce circuits, of which Austria is not really one. So there's probably even more to come from Sauber in terms of performance, potentially in Hungary, which is the next high downforce circuit. So they're looking great. Obviously, from Hulkenberg's perspective, it was good to obviously not great that he qualified dead last when he just kind of locked up into turn 4. But then he pulled off the mother of all undercuts and ended up pretty much alongside his teammate from then on, which was great from him. Liam Lawson just had his best day in Formula One in a very long time, to be honest. He had a great battle with Alonso. He was quick in the couple corners before the DRS zones, which kind of saved him. And he's happy to have shown the potential that he felt like he had, but couldn't properly demonstrate until now.
It's one of those things, especially. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say for the Sauber, because I think we keep saying that these performances for Sauber are absolutely amazing, because I suppose we for the most part this season have been going off what we saw last season, which was that it was just an absolute boat of a car. But it does actually seem now that we can maybe just start saying that Sauber have actually made some really good improvements this season, which is great to see. And the fact, this is one point I want to know on the fact that Nico Hulkenberg is sitting 10th in the drivers' championship for Sauber is just insane, proving yet again that Hulkenberg can deliver some really great performances on his day and be really consistent.
It's clearly not a flash in the pan, right? We saw that Australia result when Hulkenberg stole some points. And we thought, okay, this is really going to be where they are, and this is just going to be the only type of points performance for a while. And I guess they've proved that they're able to replicate this on different tracks. And like Daniel said, there's probably more to come as well. They've shown that a good level of consistency of, particularly in the races, having very good pace. So I'm excited to see whether they can make another step forward and maybe be on the same type of level as the Williams earlier this season. I know Williams haven't had the best of times recently, but they were very consistently 6th, 7th earlier in the season. Let's see if the Kick Saubers can kind of replace them, or at least battle to have that to share those positions. On the Lawson point, Daniel, you mentioned that the Red Bull car that he was in is like a really, really toxic X, right? I feel it's also pretty important for him to have had a very good performance, because I feel Hadjar's had a massive upper hand compared to Lawson since Lawson was back in the V Cup. And this is the first weekend where he, across the board, outperformed his teammate, I felt. Hadjar was not on the same kind of pegging as Lawson this weekend. So that was another positive thing from me. And I guess my question to you both is, is this Lawson back to where he performs best, or do you think is this something that we'll not see all the time? What do we think?
I mean, it's certainly possible that he's back, but I wouldn't want to jump on such a knee-jerk reaction, to be honest. There's still a bit more that we need to see from him, because he showed such incredible promise in when he jumped in 2023, obviously, for Daniel Ricciardo, and then in 2024 again. So, like Lando Norris, I just want the consistency to be there. He doesn't have to be P6 every weekend, of course, that's unrealistic. But maybe outclassing Hadjar a little more often, because Hadjar has shown that there is incredible pace in that car. I think he was a bit unlucky to get floor damage out of nowhere, basically, in Austria, Hadjar talking about. So we couldn't see the kind of who really was faster in that race. But yeah, just from a personal side, it's going to be great for him to have stolen that result, because his other points were in Monaco, which, it's not really it wasn't really a pace kind of race, was it? It was a qualify there and then just kind of poodle around the track. So it's good that he's earned it properly on merit this time, with no dodgy tactics involved.
I'm not sure I would necessarily agree, actually, that Lawson is back, because my question for that is, what is he returning to as such? Like, I mean, obviously, I think when he came in 2023 for when Ricciardo, I think, broke his wrist, we certainly agree that he showed some really good promise, and he had a good couple of races. But then when he had his permanent seat in 2024, he was a bit like Colapinto coming into Williams, where we were really surprised about his first few races, and they were really good. And that, I suppose, kind of built up this agenda of him being actually a really good racing driver. But then actually he did kind of fall away, I think, come the end of the 2024 season. So I mean, that's why I think when we got the announcement that he was moving to Red Bull, that I was thinking, right, this is absolutely a long-term decision, because he's shown that he has potential, but he still hasn't got that consistency. And so I think what we maybe just showed from Austria is just what we've seen in past seasons, where on his day he can deliver exceptional performances, but he just doesn't have that consistency yet. And it makes sense, because technically he's still a rookie. I mean, he's still a very inexperienced driver when it comes to Formula One, and he still has a lot of development to go through, and definitely I don't think should have been rushed up to that Red Bull seat as fast as he was. So I just think, yeah, he's shown again that he can deliver some incredible performances, as we knew he could, and now he just needs to build on those as he continues, hopefully, to stay with the Racing Bulls, to try and just get some consistency into his racecraft.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if he can replicate this on a more consistent basis, which is kind of the question we've been asking for a couple of drivers as well. So we'll see how that plays out. Just on the Hasses quickly, they got a point. Anything else we really want to say? They seem to always pop up around here. If we don't have anything to say, we can move on to the kind of the troublemakers of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend.
Yeah, I don't think too much. Obviously, as we'll probably about to mention Williams and not having the best weekend, and very unfortunate for their drivers, and then obviously predictions as well.
Yeah, cool. Let's just talk about the troublemakers of the weekend, which were Colapinto and Tsunoda. Colapinto had a very bizarre incident with Oscar Piastri where, for whatever reason, he tried to battle a car that was lapping him. He said that he never saw him. I've not seen something like that in F1 for quite a while. What was our kind of initial reaction when we saw that happen? Starting with Daniel.
My reaction was Lando Norris is about to be in the lead of this championship by 3 points, and it's all Colapinto's fault, to be honest. You're right. Colapinto said... Sorry?
Did he really think that disaster had struck and it was a retirement on the cards?
Something like that. I don't know. I just saw the camera was quite zoomed in, and we just saw Piastri getting forced into the grass more and more, and could have easily lost control, but he didn't. Obviously, he's better than that. Yeah, Colapinto did say that it was hard to know where Piastri was because of Tsunoda's positioning at turn 3, but I don't really think that's good enough. Franco had already been told about blue flags over the radio, and he should have been more aware instead of just continuing the battle. He said after the race that because of Tsunoda's move on Colapinto and spinning him round, he was desperate to get past and just kind of put the move on him, make it stick. So he was just tucking into the slipstream. He wasn't really worrying about Piastri much, which, again, isn't really good enough. The stewards gave him a 5-second time penalty because it was apparently mitigated because he couldn't see him, which I don't think is good enough either. I think it should have been 10 seconds as usual because it was quite egregious. I mean, it obviously wasn't intentional, but it was literally forcing a driver by pretty much all 4 wheels off the track.
Yeah, I've got to agree with Daniel, to be honest. I don't really understand why drivers give the excuse of, I couldn't see him, because surely that's more of an error on his part, unless he's like constantly behind the rear wing of his own car, that Piastri, unless Piastri was literally directly behind the car for all that time, and so it wasn't picked up in either of his rear mirrors, which obviously would not have happened because we knew he was right to the side of Piastri. So yeah, it's not really an excuse. I think I'll agree with Daniel on the 10-second penalty. It could have been a bit harsher. I'm not really sure what instances have happened similarly in the past, and I can't really remember what the penalties were for that. So just obviously we want consistency in F1, but it was clear cut, I think, as a race, and as Piastri did rightly point out after the race, it almost compromised his race. It could have easily put him into the wall. So yeah, really not good from Colapinto, and something he definitely needs to improve upon next time round.
Yeah, and the last kind of person who kind of caused a little bit of havoc on the circuit was Yuki Tsunoda, who probably had the most the biggest weekend that you'd want to forget. Just nothing really worked, and then he was also been involved in the wars. Do you think this type of performance puts a lot more pressure on him? He's obviously underperformed in that second Red Bull compared to Verstappen, which is not an easy kind of benchmark to meet. But do we think this was that bad for Tsunoda and his future prospects?
Well, now I think we can really start to worry about Yuki Tsunoda, because how I saw it in the race was it was kind of like the ghost of Sergio Perez, because we saw moments from Tsunoda in that race which were eerily similar. I kind of touched on it in the race rundown to what Perez used to do when he wasn't comfortable in that car. Because on Colapinto, he was nowhere near up enough up the inside to challenge for the move. You know, your front axle has to be alongside the mirror. That was certainly not the case. He was dangling the rear axle in, which is always going to make contact, especially on turn 5 in Austria, where we've seen it so many times in the past, that kind of thing happening. So it was kind of inevitable from pretty early on. You were thinking, they're going to touch it was a shame. I think the Perez example that comes to mind is Japan 2023 with Magnussen. He pulled something very similar, which is a shame. I think he really lost confidence after the Imola crash, Yuki Tsunoda. He's scored 1 point since then, I think. He said he was on a high in confidence coming into the weekend, which I think is more mindset management than anything else, to be honest. Christian Horner made an interesting comment on it. Actually, I think after the race, he said, it's not an easy car to drive, but it's not that difficult either, which is bizarre. and kind of sounds like it invalidates the struggle of the last 5 drivers in that seat. But okay, that's his opinion from the inside, which is strange. All I can say is hopefully Red Bull learn and make a more drivable car for next year when they have a fresh canvas and they've realised their mistakes and move forward better.
Callum, any agreement or disagreement with what Daniel said?
Yeah, I think so. I memean, unfortunately, obviously, I don't think it should be the case that Tsunoda's under pressure, because I think we can all agree at this point that it is a lot to do with the car. I just, as Daniel quite rightly said, you can't, like, we've had what, Gasly, Albon, Perez, Lawson, and now Tsunoda. Like, these are all drivers who have delivered on their day exceptional performances. We know that Sergio Perez, he had an extensive career in F1 before going to Red Bull, and he's shown incredible performances. He's shown his ability to control and have a very masterful race in whatever car he's in. So it's clearly not anything to do with Tsunoda. I think Tsunoda, though, is still in a very lucky position that because of what happened before him this season with Lawson, he's not really under too much pressure yet, because it will be a bit ridiculous if Red Bull went through 2 drivers before the summer break. I think they realise that that's bad even for their standards. So yeah, it's just going to be one other point I want to mention is obviously there's been a lot of talk about Verstappen and potentially moving to Mercedes, and the fact that Mercedes are trying to pursue that. I'm not sure if that's really going to happen for 2026. I still think it's unlikely, but it is going to be interesting what they do when Verstappen does leave, because suddenly they're going to have to address a problem that has plagued them for years now, really since the departure of Daniel Ricciardo from Red Bull, which is about this second Red Bull seat. Because if they can't develop the car to another driver and they can't sort out this problem, then all of a sudden, I mean, look where Tsunoda was today. Look where exactly the same as where Perez has been, where Lawson's been, near to the back of the grid. So it will be interesting to see how they sort out that problem when Verstappen does leave, at whatever point in his career that is. But for now, I don't think Tsunoda's under too much pressure, despite his absolutely terrible performances, just because of the history of what's happened with Lawson earlier this season puts him in a position which is unusually comfortable for how bad his performances have been.
Yeah, I mean, they don't really have anyone to replace him, I guess. So they're kind of stuck in that decision, at least till the end of the season. Let's whiz through our predictions and close out the show then, shall we? So who wants the luxury of going through their predictions first out of you two?
Well, I suppose I better get mine out of the way. It was a pretty dreadful weekend for me, to be honest. I think I got 3 points. I'll just check. So my pole position, I said, was Max Verstappen, which I think was not a bad bet, as obviously we know how good he's been around this circuit. I just think that I didn't anticipate how bad that Red Bull car was going to be. I think that's pretty much what dictates Verstappen's performances at this point, because we know whatever car he's in, he's going to get the most out of. So it's just a case of the Red Bull car really not being up to standard at all, even for him. I then said that Piastri was going to win. So I got a point for that, because obviously he was second in the end, so that's one position off. I then said Verstappen second, obviously not thinking that Verstappen was going to DNF, because he rarely does. Norris in third. I then put Russell in fourth, which I believe I got 1.4, with Russell finishing in fifth. And then I also put Leclerc in fifth, so I don't get any points for that. So that's 2 points for my top 5. I actually did say that the driver to DNF was going to be Antonelli. So actually, sorry, this is 5 points from my predictions, with that 3 points from my driver DNF. I thought it was going to be for unreliability, but it was actually just because of the crash that ensued on lap 1. And then my wild prediction was that 3 drivers were going to spin out at turn 4 in the race. And although we did see quite a lot of action at turn 4, obviously that lock-up and that near miss between the McLaren's at turn 4, as well as some other incidences, I don't think we got 3 drivers that fully spun round at that turn. So that's 0 points for my wild prediction. So that's 5 points overall for me.
It's not too horrible. We've seen a lot worse on this show. We've had a 0 pointer from me and a 1 pointer from Lucy. So I guess it's stacked up pretty okay.
Okay, it's not terrible there.
Yeah, you'll live with it.
Yeah.
Daniel, why don't you go next? Reveal to us what your predictions kind of fell through.
Yeah, okay. Luckily, I don't think I'll be joining the Washed Wheel Knowledge Club quite yet. I didn't do great, but I didn't do that badly. Pole position, Max Verstappen, just like Callum, which didn't come through. He was 7th. Obviously, Gasly's spin kind of put paid to his final qualifying lap. Said Norris to win the race, which is 3 points right there because that came through. Unfortunately, I said Verstappen P2 because, like Callum said, he rarely DNFs, but he did. Russell P3, I had a bit more confidence in Mercedes, but then it got hot, so no points for that. Leclerc P4, which is 1 point because he finished 3rd. Kind of thought the Ferrari upgrades would be about where they were. And Albon P5, which aged very well. So that's great. DNF was Piastri. It could have happened. It was close to happening. I saw it flash before my eyes.
It wasn't far away. On two different occasions, right?
Yeah, that too. I feel like the moment at turn 4 would have more been Norris's wheel and Piastri's front wing. So I think he could have survived. Yeah, the moment with Colapinto was quite sketchy. And my random prediction was, drumroll, a driver who qualifies on the back row of the grid gets to the points.
No way. No.
See, this could be the best prediction we've had so far.
That's incredible.
I think it is. Like I said in the preview, it's only happened twice this season, and now it's 3 times. Nico Hulkenberg, P20 to P9, the Austria GOAT. Thank you very much. That's how many points for a random prediction, Anwar? I can't remember.
5.
I think we just give you 5, man. That was incredible.
You can just give me all the points.
I'll give you just win straight off the bat.
Thank you. Thanks. Yes.
That having 3 points is a very, very good prediction. That's really good. By far and away the best one we've had so far. Was that the best? Would that be the best one that we've had in the Callum era as well?
Oh, I can't quite remember if I'm honest. Certainly, that's one of the most outrageous predictions that have actually come through in a long time. So that was very good.
Thank you.
A very impressive prediction there. I think we say 3 points for the wild prediction as well as the rest of them. I will go back and check and make sure I don't sell you short. But a good set of performances there. If I've got that right, you got 7.
Decent, I'll take it.
Which honestly you can't complain about. I also like the fact that you've coined the Washed Wheel Club as a concept because that definitely belongs on this podcast. Let's go through mine and then I'll go through Lucy's. So my prediction for pole this weekend was Lando Norris. So a nice little prediction there. So 3 points there. I also said that he'd convert. So another 3 points there. I said Piastri would finish 2nd. He did finish 2nd. So another 3 points. Verstappen finished 3rd. He obviously got taken out, so no points there. I put Russell P4. He finished 5th, so 1 point there. I also said Nico Hulkenberg in 5th, where honestly, I can live with the fact that I got that wrong because he wasn't too far away. I was kind of looking at that and thinking, oh, in quali, that doesn't look too hot. But he made it possible, I guess, as like a 1% chance. So we'll live. And then my DNF for the weekend was Alex Albon. I was kind of going against everything this podcast stands for in terms of going against Williams. So that kind of worked out well. And then my wild prediction didn't come through. I said over 10 black and white flags. I don't remember this being a discussion at all on the broadcast as a possibility. So I will take a massive L on that. But that was a total of, if I count, 13 points, which is honestly a massive improvement compared to the fact that I was getting 0 a couple of weeks ago. So I may have redeemed myself there, but we'll see how that goes. Just going through Lucy's, then we can finish out the show. Lucy said a pole position for Lando Norris, which grants her another 3 points. She said Piastri would finish in the lead or win, which is 1 point. Russell in P2, I think where you've been so used to consistent Russell performances, we kind of looked past the fact that Merc can't perform in hot conditions, so no points. Norris P3, was not familiar with Lando Norris's game, with Leclerc in P4, which nets him another point. Verstappen in P5 got a kind of retirement, I guess, a forced retirement in some way. She put a DNF on Yuki Tsunoda, which didn't happen. Might as well have retired, and that would have helped her, but so no dice there. And the random prediction was at least 5 people getting track limit penalties. Now, we had a few penalties, but we didn't get 5 penalties, and none of them were for track limits. So, unfortunately, 0 points there, which gives her 5 points, which is honestly, again, above average for this podcast. So a good performance all round from all of us. But that brings us to the end of this episode of the Warwick F1 show. I want to thank Daniel and Callum for coming on and joining me for this pod. And we'll see you at some point later this week as when we preview the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, which is guaranteed to be something that is full of entertainment. I've been your host, Anwar, and hopefully we'll see you then. Goodbye.